I want to talk about boundaries. For some people, setting boundaries is easy to do with your friends and family members, but for others, this can seem to be a very challenging thing to do, or we simply don't know where to even start. First, let's talk about why boundaries are so important for your mental health in the first place. See, establishing boundaries is good for you and for the people around you. When you're clear about your boundaries, people will understand the limits you have and will know what you are and aren't okay with. And they'll adjust their behaviors. The people who don't respect your boundaries are the ones you may not want in your life. Now, setting and maintaining boundaries will be helpful for you to conserve your emotional energy and could put you in a better state of mind. Boundaries are defined rules and limits that someone establishes to protect their security and well-being around others. We identify and express how other people can behave around us so that we feel safe. So, setting boundaries are your responsibility. You decide what is and isn't allowed in your life. So knowing what your non-negotiables are can help create clarity and give you a sense of your limits. Now, some of you might be saying, then what is a non-negotiable? Like, I've never heard this before. And I think maybe many people have, but a non-negotiable is a boundary that is not open for discussion, or it cannot be modified. Another way to look at it is that there's something that you might have or something you can't tolerate in order to stay in a relationship. So you could say a non-negotiable for you is you are not going to treat me like crap, or you will not talk to me in this way, or I will not tolerate being yelled at, talked down to. I will not tolerate you calling me certain names. And you put these in place so then people know exactly how they should treat you and how not to treat you. Because if you don't put these in place, then people will treat you however they want to treat you. So it's kind of like being in a relationship. When you get into a relationship with somebody, you say, I'm this age, and by this age, like, I want to be married and I want to have a kid, and these things are non-negotiables. And the people you might be in a relationship with might be like, well, I don't want to get married and I don't want to have kids, and that's not someone you should be with. So when you start friendships or even with your family, I think even for your mental health, it is very important for you to tell people how they can and cannot treat you, and the things you will not tolerate and the things you will tolerate. So this will also help them know when they've gone too far or when they've upset you, because if you're not setting these rules and these limits with them, then people can just do whatever they want. They'll say whatever they want, they'll treat you however they want, and then you just have to deal with it. So that's why setting the boundaries are your responsibility. You decide, only you decide what is and isn't allowed in your life. And I think that's where a lot of people with boundaries go wrong, is because you don't set boundaries with your friends or your family members or with the person you're with, your partner. And over time, you start to resent the way they treat you or the way they talk to you or the way they do things. And that's because you've never come out and say, hey, look, I don't like what you're doing and I don't think I'm going to tolerate this anymore. So I'm going to set these certain non-negotiables in place. And if you do that again to me, then I'm going to have to leave this relationship, or I'm no longer going to be friends with you guys. And with family members, it can be a little bit harder because, for some people, they stop just talking to family members and that's it. But for other people, it can be hard to just be like, okay, I'm done with you. You're out of my life. I'm never talking to you again. So if you can set these boundaries up with them, they'll know how you feel about the situations that's going on and how far you're going to let it go before you're going to say, okay, I'm no longer going to deal with this. I'm no longer going to be treated this way or feel the way I feel. And I'm sorry, you're just not going to be a part of my life. So when you think about it, boundaries are kind of like the wind. We know they exist, but they can also be very hard to detect. Without awareness or consideration, they can be crossed, forgotten, overlooked, or even rejected. And this in turn can make us feel invalidated, confused, hurt, and all of the above. But thankfully, with time, you can develop the boundaries that are considered non-negotiables to create a healthy and happy life. So now we're going to talk about how you can go about setting your own boundaries. And first, I want you to consider what your boundaries look like for you. Now, creating solid boundaries can be difficult if a person around you does not know or was not raised with healthy boundaries. So, as such, it is important to take the time to look at what you want for your own boundaries. And every relationship in your life is going to have different boundaries, but you want them to all feel safe and appropriate. So this is your time to maybe look at some of the relationships you've had with people and say to yourself, like, how do I want to be treated, and how do I want these people to treat me? So like at work, it might be a more strict boundaries of how you want someone to treat you at work, but at home, around your friends and family, it might be different boundaries. And that's why I say, like, for people with mental health issues and illnesses, like, setting boundaries around your mental health is going to help you out a lot. So then people know what to say or what not to say, or what should be talked about and shouldn't be talked about, and what you don't feel comfortable talking about, because you want to feel safe in your own environment with the people that you're with. So take some time to look at your life and to look at the different friendships and areas you have in your life to say, okay, for family members, this is the boundaries I want to set, and for friends, this is what I want to set, and for somebody I'm in a relationship, these are what I want. And then kind of tell those people what you want, because again, if you don't tell them what your boundaries look like, they are never going to know. So the next thing you can do is to practice implementing your boundaries in your everyday life. Well, it might take some time to figure out what kind of boundaries you want to put in place to create a safe and healthy life. You also want to make sure that those boundaries you create feel appropriate for each relationship. So every single day, you should think about the boundaries that you placed and then try to implement them in your daily life, so then the people around you know exactly what you're going to tolerate and what you're not going to tolerate. So it's almost like you're finding yourself training others to respect the boundaries that you've set. It might be hard at first, but in time, once you set those boundaries very clearly, the people around you will start to recognize those boundaries and will start to respect those boundaries, so you feel safe and respected at the same time. So once you repeat the boundaries and then people catch on and they know that they're not supposed to do this or treat you this way or say this thing, over time, it's just going to be a common recurrence, and they're going to know what the boundaries are, and they're not going to overstep the boundaries. And the last thing is to not let your fears get in the way. I think in natural responses to things is you don't want people to be upset with you, and you don't want them to feel uncomfortable around you. So sometimes we don't set boundaries because we just don't want anybody to feel put off. And sometimes that's like a hiccup for us because, we want people to treat us a certain way, but when we don't set the boundaries because we're scared of how they're going to react to us setting boundaries, then we just simply kind of just let people treat us how they're going to treat us, and we're just going to feel the way we feel. So don't let that fear dictate how flexible your non-negotiable boundaries can be. Once you've set those boundaries, if people don't like what you're saying or what you want, then they're simply not people that should be in your life. They should probably be people you're like, okay, maybe it's time you move on and you're not a part of my life. Because the people that love you and care for you, when you tell them how you're feeling and you've set the boundaries you've set, they will say, okay, let me know when I'm overstepping them so we can work this out. And thank you for letting me know. And your relationship with them will keep growing. So never fear the way other people are going to act, because you need to feel safe and protected yourself. And if people don't like it, people just don't like it. So let's talk about, well, what happens when someone disrespects my boundaries. I think you should be clear and calm when you talk about your boundaries when they have been violated. See, in general, non-negotiable boundaries are those that allow a person to feel safe and protected. Every person has their specific needs for how they want to do. But when you feel disrespected, then your relationships with those other people can get very unhealthy. So I think it's very important for you to sit down and be honest and kind and just tell them exactly, as clear as day, what they did and why it was wrong and why you will not be tolerating how that is anymore. So I guess an example from my past was when I left my ex. After dealing with the way I was treated and talked to and disrespected for so long, when I finally left, I basically just said, like, I am no longer tolerating you treating me like crap, and I will no longer have you talk down to me and make me feel less than I am. And you've done things over time that hurt me, and I am not doing anymore. So I am taking myself out of the situation and I am leaving. And as hard as it can be to sometimes be very calm in a situation when you feel disrespected and you're upset, it's better to do it that way, because when you come off like angry to somebody, then that person gets angry. So if that person gets angry and you're being calm, then that's a different way to be like, okay, well, I'm being calm and collected and I'm telling you exactly how I feel and exactly how I want to be treated. So if that upsets you, I'm sorry. And if you aren't going to change how you're treating me and making me feel, then it's time for you just not to be a part of my life anymore. And if that person decides, okay, well, I'm sorry, I did what I did, let them know how it can be corrected. So when you address the issue with them and you identify how you would prefer your boundaries to be respected, then that person will understand what they did wrong and they will understand that they cannot do that again. So if someone said something to you that hurt your feelings, or they stepped out of line with you, then simply just correcting that, letting them know, hey, don't talk to me like that, or don't do that to me because you belittle me that way. It's just violating the boundaries that I set with you. Please don't do that. Then if that person still wants to be part of your life, they'll understand it and they'll want to correct themselves so they don't do it again. And they'll learn that in the future, if they do this action or if they say this thing, then that is going to be something that is outside your limits of boundary and you're just not going to put up with it. And I think it's just very important with like mental health wise, if you are dealing with something and you tell the person that you thought you could trust what is going on with you, and they blow you off or they say it's not that big of a deal, and you've like multiple times talked to them about like how you're feeling and the boundaries that you put in front of yourself to protect yourself and feel safe, and they make you feel unsafe, then it's really a good thing to let them know why you feel unsafe and why they disrespected what you wanted them to do. And if it's something that they don't feel like they could correct, or feel like they need to work on, then again, I think the biggest thing is if people don't understand how you feel and how you should be treated, then they are not people who should be allowed to be in your life. So I found this cute picture on Pinterest that I thought was very clear on how to set boundaries. So I wanted to share it with you guys. So it's the first little box is to identify when a boundary has been crossed. So is there a situation making you feel angry, anxious, defensive, overwhelmed? And is your nervous system hyperactive, which is heart racing, rapid breathing, flush face, and body shaking? So first two is to identify what boundary has been crossed and how it is making you feel. And then your next step would to be communicating your boundaries. So be clear and direct but polite. No is not a complete sentence. You do not have to explain yourself if you don't want to. Maintain a respectful tone. Use I statements and small talk. So that's why if someone crosses that boundary, you have the next step of communicating why that boundary has been crossed and why it has upset you. And the next thing is to set the consequences with those people. Let the person know what will happen if they cross that boundary again, like leaving the room or hanging up the phone, and avoid harsh ultimatums. So I think basically you're saying, like, if I have the boundary crossed and if I feel this way, then what's going to happen is I'm going to leave the room, I'm going to cool down, and maybe we'll talk about it later. I think they're basically saying you don't want to say, like, if this, and this happens, like, we're no longer friends. You want to try to give them the option to correct what went wrong, so then you can still have a relationship with them and you can still figure out how your relationship is going to work. And your last thing to remember is that you are going to expect the pushback. Accept resistance, but remain firm. Try not to take the other person's reaction personally. They may react negatively because they don't understand the importance of setting healthy boundaries, as they don't have their own. So again, if you are talking to somebody and you're calm and collective and they get upset and they don't understand, and now they're angry because they just don't understand why you're telling them this, it's okay. Try to remain calm and firm and just relay to them that in your life and in your relationships and for your mental health, you are setting these boundaries. And when someone crosses those boundaries, you are not going to tolerate them doing so. So you are coming to them because you honor your friendship with them and you want them to know exactly what they did and why it upset you. And the reason you're telling them is because you want to still have a relationship with them. So you're just letting them know that what they did was not okay. And if it happens again, then this is what you're going to do, like not talk to them, or you're going to leave the room, or you're going to hang up the phone, or you're going to take a couple days to not see them to get yourself together. And then you can come back and maybe talk about it again. People get upset when they think they're being told they did something wrong. Like, nobody likes to be told they did something wrong. So just expect that people might get upset, and just calmly tell them, this is what I want and this is how I want to be treated, and I'm sorry, but if you're not happy with it, then you're not happy with it. And again, I'll say, if they're not happy with it, they don't need to be in your life. So boundaries have 4 types, which is physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual. So your physical this is your physical space, your bubble, which includes who you allow to touch you, be close to you, and to be in your personal space. And then mentally, This is your internal climate of safety, including your thoughts, feelings, emotions, values, options, benefits, and these are scared to you and you are allowed to have them. Number 3 is emotional. This is allowing yourself to separate your feelings from those of others and not taking on others' burdens, not having to be defined by your job, social status, or family. And your last one is spiritual. This is giving yourself permission to define your relationship with whatever higher power you relate to, if any, and not letting others control your calling or talent in life. So I think once you know what your boundaries are, and now that you've set them, and now you know what you're going to do if they're disrespected, it's going to be easier for you to talk to the people that you love and the people that you let come into your life to know exactly what they are, how you're going to be treated, and what the consequences are if they're not respected. And ultimately, if you feel like over time someone has disrespected your boundaries over and over and over again, then maybe after so many times of talking to them, you can just simply say, this has been a recurring thing. I've told you many times this is not the way I want to be treated or talked to, or whatever it is that comes up. And you can just say, ultimately, I think it is time to go our separate ways and not be in contact anymore. As sad as that can be, sometimes that's going to be a healthier way and a way healthier for mental health than trying to constantly keep justifying why the person is treating you the way they're treating you. So now let's talk about what happens when you don't set boundaries. If you don't set the healthy boundaries, you are likely to constantly be at the mercy of others. You are allowing others to tell you how you feel, think, and act. It also means you tend to spend your time and your energy doing what others want to do over doing what you actually want to do. So when we don't have boundaries, we end up risking losing ourselves. So some examples could be we dread looking forward to each day and getting out of bed. We start to resent others for having needs, and with an imbalance in our relationship, we can start to feel on edge, angry, and irritated towards others, even though we would never ever let them know how we feel. We start to become unaware of what the limited boundaries look like. We feel overrun all the time. We start to move from crisis to crisis as we continue to feel out of control. Our life starts to feel meaningless. We feel guilty or angry when we considered setting boundaries. We don't know how to answer someone who wants our time, love, energy, and money. And we have the inability to actually say no when people make us feel less than. So basically, over time, when you don't set boundaries, it can make you start to feel like and everything is out of control, and you can start to feel like your feelings don't ever get considered, and then you're just kind of going along with life and kind of doing whatever they want you to do. And then over time, I think this just mentally drains you, and that's when relationships with the people you love can turn to the worst, and you end up saying something or hurting their feelings when you really didn't mean to, and the end of the relationship ends really badly. So I know that setting boundaries can be challenging because it's easy to say that we want better boundaries, but to achieve them, it can be harder than it sounds. But really, setting boundaries in your life is going to be one of the most important things you can do for yourself, because again, when you don't set these boundaries, then you can feel worse about yourself or feel like your feelings and your thoughts and your concerns are never considered, and then you're just kind of doing everything in your power to make everybody else happy, but you're not doing what makes you happy. And especially if you're suffering from a mental health illness, over time, this is going to take a very big toll on you. And I know for me that when I'm dealing with a lot of things, I used to hold them inside and not talk about them. And then over time, the more it built up, the more over time, when it finally came to a head, I just exploded. And then it was almost like the person you're exploding on is like, oh my gosh, where did this even come from? So I think setting boundaries with your friends and your family and the people you love is going to be very good, because then this allows everybody in your life to know exactly what is going on, how you feel, how you want to be treated, how certain situations should go about, and how you should be treated during those certain situations. If you're having a bad day, what maybe should and shouldn't be said. If you need to have just a day by yourself, then they know how to deal with that. If you break down and cry and you're being emotional, then they know how to deal with that. And those are the type of boundaries that are important, not again just for you, but for the people around you. So then people know exactly what needs to be done and needs to know how you need to be treated. So then your relationships grow into stronger ones than weaken over time. So now there are 5 different tips I want to share with you to improve your overall well-being. The first one would to be communicating your thoughts. Be honest but respectful when you share your thoughts and feelings with someone else. It's okay to take some time to gather yourself before and after the conversation, but don't let that become an excuse for avoiding telling them how you really feel. Number 2 is to never assume or guess somebody else's feelings. Making assumptions can create a lot of misunderstanding in a relationship. You may feel like you know someone so well that you could guess what they're thinking, but it's always best to ask rather than assume. Number 3 is to follow through on what you say. Setting boundaries but not following through lets the other person think they have an excuse to continue to overstep your boundaries. Don't make any expectations to your boundaries without thinking about it clearly. Otherwise, you may find yourself compressing on things that aren't acceptable to you. Number 4 is to take responsibility for your actions. Instead of placing the blame or complaining about the situation or how you feel, take a step back and think about the choices you made in the relationship and whether you may have contributed to the situation. And lastly, number 5 is to know when it's time to move on. You can share how you want to be treated in a relationship, but you aren't responsible for your partner's feelings or communication. Everyone has the right to be treated with respect and fairness. If someone cannot respect your boundaries, it is time to end that relationship. And the last thing, too, is to remember when to say no. Saying no to anything that doesn't align with you in your life, if it makes you feel uncomfortable, when you're overlooked, if the request crosses your boundaries, or if you are always saying yes to people to be a people pleaser. When something is not aligned with your boundaries or how you want to live your life or how you want to be treated, you simply just say no. No, thank you. Or I won't be able to make it. I have another commitment. Or no, thank you. I am not able to take that on right now. Thanks for thinking of me, but no. There are always nice ways to say no than just straight out being like, no. Like if someone asks you, oh, we're getting together after work and we really want you to come, but mentally and emotionally you just don't want to go, you could say, oh, thanks for thinking of me, but I actually have another commitment I have to go to tonight, so I'm not going to be able to make it. So you make the other people feel like, thank you for offering and thank you for inviting me, but I actually have something else to do. So then that person just if you just say no and they're like, well, why not? And you're like, because I don't want to, then you could make that person in the future not want to invite you with things or make them feel turned off of even trying to invite you to anything that they feel like you might want to come to. So just remember that saying no is going to be important for your relationships, and saying no in the right way so then your relationship isn't affected and that someone doesn't feel hurt is going to be the best way to knowing when you feel uncomfortable or when something isn't exactly the way you want it to be, or if your boundary is going to be overstepped. You just simply say thank you, but unfortunately at this time I just cannot do or go to where you want me to go, and you make up an excuse that is polite and you kind of go on your way. Because when you keep saying yes and yes and yes, but you really don't want to do stuff, then you're going to be caught in situations where you're like, oh my gosh, why did I come? Or why did I say yes? And now I'm just miserable. So you see, setting boundaries is so important and healthy for your mental health. Even when it can be challenging, learning what boundaries are going to work for you and the people around you are going to be important for your day-to-day life. Once you know what you will and will not tolerate, it will be easier to set those boundaries with the ones you love and the ones you want to be in your life. If those people don't want to respect your boundaries, again, then it's time to move on and realize that you might be better off without those people in your life. Do what's best for you and what's going to bring you peace. So like always, I want you to remember that you are never alone and that I love you.